Okay. All right. Good morning, everybody. I hope you had a good weekend.
Good morning, Dr. Don.
I know. I'm right there with you. A little coffee. Well, mostly coffee. I think it's funny, Miss Springer. Anyways, but it's good to see you all. And please remember that quiz number 3 is up on Canvas, so do that by the end of the week, please. And I noticed in the syllabus, I was looking through the syllabus, and things slip by, and I apologize for that. But I noticed that twice on the syllabus, I have you reading chapter 6 from the textbook from Brian Cain, The Blessing of Life. And you should only really read it once. So I'll send out an email with a revision of the just the schedule on the textbook, so you know which week you should have chapter 6 read. And I think chapter 6 is end of life issues, so it should be read really with what we're going to talk about, end of life issues. And I also think I want to have you read chapter 2. So maybe that's where I made my mistake. I probably forgot to put chapter 2 instead of and I put chapter 6 instead. So I'll send out an email about that. So just stay tuned for that, please. And I think that's it. Okay. We'll move on and finish with Catholic ethics and normative principles. We've been going through the normative principles that were outlined in the ERD, the Ethical and Religious Directives for Catholic Healthcare. And we're on the last one, which is magisterium. Our old friend, magisterium. Common good. Stewardship. Okay, magisterium. Yeah, I talked about that. Okay, so the last one, which is magisterium. Okay. And this is the quotation from the principle. Oh, Miss. Okay. Good morning, Ms. Mitchell. Okay, let me just scan the room again to see I didn't miss anybody. Okay. Magisterium, which we already know about, so I don't need to beat a dead horse, or as the other saying goes, I don't need to gild the lily, as they say, because I've already talked about it enough when we talked about sources of authority. But nevertheless, this is what the ERD has to say about it. Within a pluralistic society, Catholic healthcare services will encounter requests for medical procedures contrary to the moral teachings of the Church. Catholic healthcare does not offend the rights of individual conscience by refusing to provide or permit medical procedures that are judged morally wrong by the teaching authority of the Church. Magisterium, teaching authority. Magister means a teacher. As I said, I've already discussed magisterium, so I don't need to say much to define it for you. You have your definition. When I read this, it's a rather weird principle, because it's not really stated as a principle. Where we have the other normative principles, it talks about the care for the poor, the sacredness of life, and care for the person. It has the principle of the common good, but here it's almost defensive, which I found kind of a weird way, an unusual way to phrase or frame the issue, because it starts out with really kind of a negative comment that there might be requests for people to do things that are contrary to the moral teachings of the Church. And I guess that's one of the challenges of modern Catholic healthcare, that you have that has its normative principles and things that it's going to govern its organization by, but there might be issues where people ask a Catholic institution to do things that are against its normative principles. And it says that it does not it kind of is a defensive posture. We're not offending your conscience by not doing things that you want us to do that are against our principles or our values. So for me, it's a rather unusual way to phrase or frame the issue of the magisterium. Nevertheless, the point has already been made that Catholic healthcare institutions operate according to their own religious, supernatural point of view of the world and of the human person. based on the gospel of Jesus Christ and the teachings of the church. So you kind of know what you're getting into when you go to a Catholic institution as opposed to a secular institution. There are different values involved. Sometimes the values overlap, okay, but sometimes they don't if certain procedures are asked for. So there are certain ethical non-negotiables, we might call them, of Catholic healthcare as stated above already. Okay, for example, if there was a question about care for the poor, or that the poor should not be cared for. Not that anyone would I can't imagine anyone really asking for that, but just as a thought experiment, as an example, if there were an issue where it made it ethically impossible, or the way the healthcare system was arranged, it made it very difficult to care for poor people, that would be something the church would have to object to. It would have to insist, and maybe to some extent it does, by insisting that healthcare is a fundamental right for all people, because that would, of course, include not just those who are rich and can afford their healthcare, but definitely is a concern of the poor, that they should be taken care of. Their essential, basic healthcare should be taken care of. Okay, let me just write this down. Mr. Dietzel and Mr. Kazin. Okay, let's see what else. Anybody else we're missing? Oh, Ms. Reyes is here. Hello, Ms. Reyes. But that would be an example where it's a non-negotiable of Catholic healthcare services that they would take care for the poor and the marginalized, the underserved, and if the system were inhibiting that, that's something that would have to be opposed. Mr. Thomas, 1 second. So one should not expect that Catholic healthcare services would violate those principles when coming into a Catholic healthcare institution. You would expect that if they say they're part of a Catholic healthcare service, that they're operating according to certain principles, care for the poor, the sacredness of the human person, the common good, okay, these various elements of the normative principles for the operation of a Catholic healthcare system. Nor is the Catholic healthcare institution required to respect someone's conscience, which is at variance with its own principles. Okay, we have consciences. I'll talk about conscience in a later class and how we form our own conscience. And yes, we are supposed to act according to our conscience when we have a certain conscience about what to do. In fact, it's an obligation. We have a certain conscience about what our action should be. We should act on that, and we have the right and the freedom to do that. But on the other hand, the Catholic institution has its own values, which it has to act on, and they have to act according to their consciences. I can always leave the Catholic institution. I can always choose not to go there. But the Catholic institution can't leave its building. It's there. It's established. And if it's not doing what it's supposed to be doing, then it's not a Catholic institution anymore. It's lost its reason for being. It's lost its integrity, and you can't respect it anymore. So while a person may say, a woman may come into, or not say a woman, but say a man comes into the hospital thinking that he needs a vasectomy because he doesn't want any more children. Say, sorry, it's a Catholic hospital. We don't do sterilizations. It's against our principles. Human life is to be transmitted. That's the normal process, and we don't interfere in that process. Again, we'll talk about that later when we talk about abortion and contraception. But you explain it, and the person says, well, I don't agree with that. Well, that's fine. I'm not going to, if the man says, I in conscience think this is a good thing for me and this is something I've chosen to do, okay, that's fine. We have a disagreement, we have a conflict. The resolution of the conflict is not for one party to violate his or her conscience and say, okay, we'll just do it, we'll give in. But it's for the other party to say, okay, I respect the integrity of your conscience, but in the integrity of my conscience, I'm going to leave here and go someplace else where they'll do this for me. A person requests, well, I gave that example, but I have another example here, but I don't need to go into it. Here's a quotation from Pope St. John Paul II. It's for his message that he gave on the 11th World Day of the Sick, which occurred in 2003. Okay, hey, Miss Weir. Ms. Weir. Crystal Palace got destroyed this weekend. 4-0 to Newcastle. 4-0, Mr. Thatch. Can you believe it? I was very disappointed. Oh well, but Leicester won. Catholic hospitals should be centers of life and hope, which promote, together with chaplaincies, ethics committees, training programs for lay health workers, personal and compassionate care of the sick, attention to the needs of their families, and a particular sensitivity to the poor and the marginalized. Professional work should be done in a genuine witness to charity, bearing in mind that life is a gift from God and man merely its steward and guardian. Why did I choose this quote? Oh, think, Dr. Dunn, why did you choose this quote? Well, I chose this quote because I believe it offers a kind of a brief summary of some of the principles that we've been talking about. He mentions compassionate care for the sick, so that would be the dignity of the human person, and well, doesn't mention the sacred. He does mention the sacredness of life. The dignity of the human person. He mentions the sacredness of life, that life is a gift from God. The common good, which is attention not just to the needs of the sick, but also the needs of their families. Care for the poor and the marginalized is mentioned. He mentions that. Stewardship, that human beings are merely the stewards and guardians of the life which has been given to us. So this is what in Catholic centers, hospitals should be centers of life and hope. Life and hope. Not just any kind of life, but eternal life, because that's where we're all going eventually, God willing. That we're not just, this is not our home, this is not our only place of rest, but that we're moving on to somewhere else to be with God forever, and that is our hope as well. So that's what we're offering to the sick and the suffering, that it's not just a bed for them to lie in as they die or as they're sick, but that there's purposefulness to it. There's meaning to what's going on to them. And I was just in a hospital last night. I had to take my hospital to an emergency room because it's probably her leg is infected or something. They don't know. They're running tests. They did all sorts of stuff. And, it was it wasn't a Catholic hospital. It was a secular hospital. But it was just interesting for me to sit there and observe. And I was sitting there reading through my book, The Blessing of Life, just taking, I had the time. So I'm like, okay, let's see what Brian Cain has to say about things. So as they're treating my mom, I'm reading through this book. And it was interesting. It was interesting to just, as I was there, to be present and observe how they were treating her. And they did treat her like a human person. They treated her with great kindness and respect. Had to wait a long time, but that's just, that's par for the course in, I think, any hospital. And I noticed when I went in the emergency room, and this might show the influence of Catholic healthcare to some extent, or at least religiously oriented healthcare, that they had a screen, a TV screen that was showing different prayers from different religions. So it had Hindu prayers up from the Atharva Veda. If you take world religions with me, you'll know what the Atharva Veda is, but it's a book of charms and all sorts of kind of blessings and charms and prayers and things that Hindus can pray if they're sick, and they were showing ones that were for the sick. They're showing Muslim prayers, quotations from the Quran, and that's all I could see after that. I didn't see anything else because I was too busy looking at my book. But yeah, so they're taking care of not just, they recognize that there is a spiritual need there for the patient. And that's going to be you. you're going to be, because chaplains can't be everywhere. Priests are, there are fewer and fewer priests. So a lot of times they might not even have a priest assigned to a hospital, or if they do, he's busy and he's not always there. And you are going to be that representative, one might say, of God for these people, because you're going to have their life in your hands. And they're going to be asking you questions about life and the meaning of their illness and their suffering that hopefully you have some answers for, or have some compassion for. So that's it about that. Okay. Let's see here. Let me just make sure I got everybody still. Stella Cruz. And okay, so whoops. Okay, just one missing. Oh well. All right, I have a video to show you. It is let's get my notes on it. Hold on a second. It is of a talk, a lecture that was given at, as you can tell, Emory University, which is located in Georgia. It was founded as a religious school. I forget if it's Baptist or not. Oh, Mr. Saravo, I forget which denomination it is. Someone wants to look it up on your cell phone, and I'll give you an extra credit point if you can tell me. I forget. I thought it was Baptist, but I could be wrong. Might be Methodist. Okay, so everybody's here.
It's Methodist.
It's Methodist? Thank you, sir. Mr. Thatch. Good note here. Okay. And I think they have, I know they have a divinity school. I'm pretty sure they have a divinity school, which is kind of like a seminary where they teach people to become clergy, but I don't know how religious a school it is. Nevertheless, it doesn't really matter. But here is a talk that they gave a number of years ago from a Sister Carol Keehan. Sister Carol Keehan, DC. She's a member of the Daughters of Charity of St. Vincent de Paul. St. Vincent de Paul. St. Vincent de Paul was a man, Frenchman, I believe, a saint, who founded religious orders for the care of the poor. I think the Congregation of the Mission is the male group, and then he founded at least one, maybe more. They're groups that take their inspiration from him, and take his ministry of specifically caring for the poor, educating poor people for free, taking care of their healthcare needs. And so she's a member of this group, which might have been founded by him. I'd have to look it up, but certainly takes its inspiration from him. So they're called the Daughters of Charity of St. Vincent de Paul. She is also a registered nurse. So when she entered the order, she decided to serve in their healthcare unit. And she was the 9th president and CEO of the Catholic Health Association of the United States of America, which oversees generally the hundreds of Catholic healthcare institutions in the United States. She was in that position from 2005 to 2019, so she's retired from that position. And I guess that's all I really want to say about her. That's an introduction to her. And this is a talk she gave at, I think, something called the Aquinas Center that's at Emory University, and it's called The Challenges of Catholic Healthcare in a Complex World. And you might want to take some notes on it. You don't have to be laborious about it, but you might want to take some notes about some of the things she said, because you never know, something might show up on a quiz. Maybe 1 or 2 questions might be about this video, but I make no promises. But I'm a tricksy professor, so you never know, just to see if you're listening, Ms. Cerna, right? No. Okay. Got to leave me alone. Look. Okay. Sorry.
To you by Emory University.
Thank you very much, Phil and Jan, both. I've had nothing but the warmest welcome here at Emory, and I have to tell you how honored I am to have been invited here. I said earlier tonight when Phil was introducing me to the board of the Aquinas Center, and he quoted Time magazine. And I said, it does sound really classy to be chosen as one of the 100 most influential people in the world, until you really look closely at the rest of the list. So Lady Gaga, 3 or 4 dictators. It is not the communion of saints. So I come to you as a simple daughter of charity who's had a great privilege of working in healthcare for a long, long time and feels strongly about this nation's responsibility to everyone in it for quality healthcare. So I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you tonight, and I want to tell you that I am open to any of your questions, comments, concerns, and it is an incredible honor to be invited as part of the Aquinas Center at Emory University. Tonight I come to you as someone who believes in Catholic healthcare and that it is a treasure for the United States. We have a stellar history in this nation from the beginnings with the Ursuline community in the first Catholic hospital in the United States, opened in New Orleans, to what goes on today in our Catholic hospitals. Currently, we have about 630 Catholic hospitals and over 1,600 Catholic continuing healthcare ministries like senior centers, nursing homes, surgery centers, clinics, daycare centers, etc. That's over 2,200 Catholic healthcare ministries in this nation. We are the largest private, not-for-profit healthcare group in the nation. We employ over 800,000 people, not to mention our large medical staffs. We are often the largest employer in the cities that we work in, and we're almost always among the top 10 largest employers. We have 19 million emergency visits every year and over 100 million outpatient visits and growing. Our program focuses are not only on those areas that the community needs, but those the community needs that will not pay for themselves. And more often than in any other form of sponsored hospital, you will find in Catholic hospitals those programs that the communities need, but programs that will never pay for themselves. These include things like psychiatry, substance abuse treatment, hospice programs, neonatal intensive care, certain geriatric programs, and many others. In some states in this country, we are over 30% of the hospital admissions. And in the United States, 1 out of every 6 people admitted to a hospital is admitted to a Catholic hospital. We have a good track record for quality. And in fact, just a couple years ago, Thomson Reuters said that on average, one could find a better quality of care in a Catholic health facility than in any other type of sponsored facility, and that it was because Catholic healthcare and their boards considered quality part of their mission. Lastly, we have been an ethical witness for healthcare in many areas, ranging from the care of the poor, the dignity of each individual, and moral principles in medical decision-making. However, it is really clear to anyone that healthcare has gone from its humble beginnings in homes converted into hospitals to really big business. The economics have become much more complex and in many ways have created competing and perverse incentives. Stocks that largely revolve around healthcare are some of the major drivers in our marketplace today. Modalities of treatment have also revolutionized, and that revolution shows no sign of slowing down. We've truly only begun to see the massive changes that will happen in healthcare treatments. Even in my lifetime, I watched as a student nurse patients with heart disease, come into our emergency rooms, and we had reasonably few modalities to treat them. EKG, maybe an echocardiogram, pain medication, oxygen, and a couple of cardiac drugs. Even if you couldn't afford your care, these modalities cost very little, and the major treatment for heart disease at that time was bed rest. Today, we have standards in our emergency rooms that require the ability to go from the door of that emergency room to the cath lab within 30 minutes, including doing all kinds of diagnostic tests before you get there and giving major clot-busting drugs and other modalities, as well as a plethora of cardiac medications. All extraordinarily expensive technology. But our cardiac death rate for men and women in their 40s and 50s has been dramatically and positively impacted by these advances. We could go through that in many other health conditions and tell the same story. Tremendous improvement in quality and outcome and significantly increased costs. Adding to this, the United States is in a unique healthcare environment in general and in Catholic healthcare in particular. From the general perspective, we are the only industrialized nation that does not give all its citizens a guarantee of healthcare. We spend the most incredible amounts per capita on healthcare, actually twice and more of what other industrialized nations spend per capita. In addition, when you look at the outcome and satisfaction statistics for those big expenses, we lag behind every other industrialized nation in outcome statistics, quality measures, and patient satisfaction, irrespective of who does the study, whether we do the study or someone from another country. Lastly, we have multiple forces today contending for the many dollars in healthcare that are out there. The pharmaceutical industry, the medical equipment and devices manufacturers, insurance companies, and a world of consultants and financial firms vie for the billions that are involved in U.S. healthcare today. This dramatically increases the complexity for making healthcare decisions in a rational way. For Catholic healthcare, the United States is also very unique in its response. I see this so often when I'm in Rome in the various Vatican offices, trying to explain issues in Catholic healthcare. As an immigrant church, Catholic healthcare and Catholic education were developed in response to the needs of an emerging nation, and we've matured into important forces in that young nation. Historically, it is important to look at the fact that at a time when women held few management positions and sisters did very little outside convent walls, and certainly not much at all in the business community, religious women developed in the United States the largest and most successful not-for-profit healthcare system the world has ever known. It remains a unique experience to this country. I know of no other country that has the kind of Catholic healthcare system we enjoy today. Also, it is very challenging in the Vatican and other countries to explain the importance of Catholic healthcare and how important it is to the almost 50 million uninsured in our country, to people from other industrialized nations who cannot comprehend the richest nation in the world not giving at least basic health care to all its citizens. Why, for the Vatican to understand why it is so critical to the care of the poor that we stay alive and vibrant, is very hard to explain when they have no experience of any other industrialized country and many other far less industrialized countries not giving basic health care. Catholic healthcare has matured as the country matured and has been very effective in responding to the new healthcare environment. You will find, for the most part, that Catholic healthcare facilities enjoy strong bond ratings, high quality metrics, and have developed very efficient structures for everything from purchasing to systems approaches for quality and financing. Perhaps most impressive of all has been over the past 30 years, the intentional efforts of religious women to prepare the laity to assume the responsibility for major roles in Catholic healthcare. In 1968, as Vatican Council II was ending, there were in Catholic hospitals 770 CEOs who were religious and 26 CEOs who were lay people. Today, in 2013, there are 4 CEOs who are religious and 626 lay CEOs in Catholic hospitals. The sisters didn't just punch out.
Sorry to interrupt. I should specify when she says religious, she doesn't mean like other people in the hospitals are not religious, like they don't practice a religion or practice the faith. What he means is that they're people who are committed to a religious order, like a sisterhood, like she is, or to a group of brothers and stuff like that. And lay people are those people who are not clergy, but they're not religious either. They're not members of a religious order. So that's what, just to clarify the terminology in case you didn't know what she meant.
They spent an enormous amount of time and resources in educational programs, mentoring programs, and other developmental programs to prepare management staff, governance members, and now sponsors for Catholic healthcare. These programs help lay people to assume the roles that the Vatican Council called for from the laity. They help them to understand that while their roles in Catholic healthcare required all the same education and skills that any healthcare facility would require, Catholic healthcare required more. They were accepting the responsibility for a ministry of the church, and that is a significant responsibility to take on. In addition to these efforts, Catholic hospitals pioneered mission programs so that when there were not sisters in every department, there would be an intentional effort at every level in our hospitals to help staff appreciate that while this was a job where they earned their living, it was also part of the mission of Catholic healthcare, and it gave it a special dignity and a special responsibility. Just as our hospitals had a department vested with the responsibility overall for looking at quality and overall for looking at finances, we now have developed a department that has a responsibility overall for looking and assuring the presence of mission in our hospitals. So what are the challenges that are especially concerning to the future of Catholic healthcare? I will go through some of them, not necessarily in their order of importance, but all have to be dealt with. The first is economic. There is no question there is a huge amount of money involved in every component of healthcare. And first and foremost, it requires absolute integrity with this so that the appropriate transparency is there and that the appropriate safeguards are there. We are handling the fiscal resources of a ministry of the church dedicated to the care of the sick and the promotion of health in a given community. That is a very serious responsibility. Financial practices need the safeguards that assure that the integrity expected of a church facility is easy to document. Another economic challenge will be maintaining the fiscal health of an organization. And this takes all the same skills and commitment that it does in other healthcare organizations, as well as the ability to balance legitimate competing claims. By that I mean we want stability in our healthcare organization for many reasons. First of all, for the good of the community. Second, for the stability of employment for those who've committed to the organization. And for other things such as our bond ratings, our ability to access capital and acquire new technology. But at the same time, we also want to do programs that community needs, but that will not pay for themselves. We want to be there to help people get the care they need, not just the care they can afford. We want to be an example of our church's preference for the poor. We want to be there for the undocumented who are not eligible for programs. And these and other claims compete against financial viability. It takes real creative compassion to do this well. Another challenge will be health reform. I think you are all aware that the Affordable Health Care Act has passed in Congress, unless you've been in a coma for the last 3 years. It has now survived a Supreme Court challenge and the re-election of the president, and has been voted down in the House of Representatives 33 times since it was first passed. There is no question that this bill was as important and as significant as the passage of Medicare and Medicaid in the early 60s. And if you go back and study the history of the passage of the Medicare bill, you will find so much that is so similar, it will astound you. At the height of the controversy over it, I had someone research the articles in the New York Times for that period. It was a remarkable stroll down history's lane. The opposition to passing the Medicare bill was overwhelming. It was going to be the demise of everything that was good about healthcare in the United States. The AMA wholeheartedly opposed it, and in early 1965, after it was first implemented, we prepared for a nationwide strike of physicians because of the ferocity of their opposition. There were differences of opinion within the church, and clearly the same political parties were fighting over whether it was a much-needed improvement or a socialist disaster. Today, not having Medicare is unthinkable. Let me be really clear that the Affordable Care Act is not the bill I would have passed. I doubt that it is the bill that any member of Congress or the White House staff would have passed. It is the bill we could get passed. The many competing forces who have a strong financial stake in the healthcare delivery system competed ardently, as well as consumer groups, unions, and the Chamber of Commerce. Having said that, I support the bill, and like the Medicare bill that we passed in the early 60s, this bill will be modified and improved as the nation learns from it. Catholic healthcare has long pushed for healthcare for everyone. Our church's official teaching is that healthcare is a universal right. We had developed at CHA a vision for what we wanted in health reform, and the first principle of that vision was the protection of life from the moment of conception until the moment of natural death. We made it very clear to the members of the House, the Senate, and the White House that there was no way CHA could support a bill if it contained federal coverage for abortion. As much as we wanted health reform, that would be the absolute deal breaker. I am happy to report to you that there have been 2 federal judges, one in Virginia and one in Ohio, who have now ruled definitively that there is no federal funding for abortion in the Affordable Care Act. But still, it remains a huge challenge for Catholic hospitals, as well as for other hospitals and the nation in general. How well we respond to this is going to be critical to the service we owe our brothers and sisters, to the fiscal health of our institutions and our communities, as well as how well we advance our church's call for healthcare for everyone. Hospitals took a very large financial hit in order to get healthcare for 30 to 32 million of the almost 50 million in our country who don't have healthcare today. That financial hole was to be filled by having such a large number of patients who were formerly either charity care or bad debt now become insured patients. If we do not help to get the exchanges set up and the Medicaid expansion in each state done, then we first of all will not have the care for our brothers and sisters who deserve health insurance. And secondly, we will not reduce the charity care and bad debt to our institutions and the cost shifting of it to businesses, insurance companies, and patients that continually goes on today. This is for you in Georgia, a real moment of decision. And I would encourage you to do all you can to encourage your state to take advantage of this for the uninsured. Georgia has the 6th largest number of uninsured people of any state in the union. And Atlanta also has the 6th largest number of uninsured people of major cities in the United States. You could dramatically change those statistics in 2004 by fully implementing the exchanges and the Medicaid expansion. Another important challenge for Catholic hospitals is the preparation for mission at all stages. When the sisters first started the education programs and the mentoring programs for lay people in management, governance, and sponsorship, there were many more sisters there to mentor and to talk about how decisions should be made coming from a gospel perspective. The sisters worked side by side in almost every department of the hospital to talk about the dignity of patients, how they should be treated, and why it was such an important calling for each of us, as well as an important responsibility. With so many fewer sisters, we now rely on committed lay people to mentor lay people coming into our organizations at every level. Having appropriate and compelling education programs, as well as mentoring and spiritual development programs that do this effectively, is a significant challenge. This will not happen on automatic pilot. It has to be the fruit of an intensive effort that is always becoming more and more creative. The Catholic Health Association in the coming year will cooperate with CARA, which is the Center for Applied Research in the Apostolate, to look at the last 20 to 30 years of these programs that have been conducted in many areas of our country, but focused on the same thing, developing a mission sense and a mission heart in the people at all levels in our organizations. They will evaluate with the people who've participated what worked, what hasn't worked, what was most successful and least successful, and share that with the ministry as we begin the next era in education programs. Frankly, I see a big opportunity for Chandler and the Aquinas Center in this kind of effort. This is especially important as we have transitioned from sharing sponsorship with to sharing sponsorship with the laity. Previously, and we probably never paid an ounce of attention to this, religious communities, and in a small number of cases the diocese, would be responsible to the Vatican for the ministry of the church, or a ministry of the church. This meant that religious communities like the Sisters of Mercy, the Franciscans, the Daughters of Charity, would be responsible to the Vatican through the Congregation of Religious for a ministry of the church. It meant that if we wanted to sell some property, do a bond issue, obligate the ministry for a financial loan, we had to get their permission. If we wanted to sell it, we had to get their permission. It also meant that the hospital was committed to following the ethical and religious directives and functioning as a Catholic ministry. The religious community took the responsibility for assuring this to the Vatican. Because religious communities were aging and did not have as many sisters with the required expertise, and in response to the call of the Second Vatican Council, new forms of sponsorship were developed called public juridic persons. These are canon law structures that allow public juridic persons to be set up, made of people who commit to the Vatican to be responsible for this ministry of the Church. It is no longer the religious community that now reports. It is the public juridic person, most often made up of a majority, if not 100% lay people. I can tell you that the personnel in the Vatican that have been responsible for vetting these new structures and getting them approved have been incredibly impressed by the transparency, the quality of the commitment and preparation, and the quality of reporting back and accountability that has taken place. For many lay people, this has been an opportunity to live their baptismal consecration in a much more important way in service to their church. Another critical challenge and opportunity are the technological and scientific advances we see on the horizon. Certainly, technology in general has been such an incredible help. We look at the major surgeries that used to take weeks of hospitalization, and now they're either done in one day or as an outpatient, through these tiny incisions robotically. This is only going to continue. The replacement of body parts and the electronic assist for various organs will continue. If we add to that the emerging advances in genomic therapy and stem cells, we have a whole new world opening up. Genome mapping and stem cell therapies have enormous potential, and some of it is already being realized today. We see great work in some centers using genomic insights and matching cancer treatment. There are very important advances and very important ethical challenges to be studied and understood and dealt with as we harvest the value of these therapies. Stem cell therapy is doing extraordinarily well, and I'm happy to report that it appears much more possible and probable that adult stem therapy, stem cells from the umbilical cord and placental sources, show much more promise than embryonic stem cell. Hopefully, we will see in our day the abandonment of embryonic stem cell therapy. The Vatican, through the Pontifical Council for Culture, has done some extraordinary work in helping to showcase the advances in ethical stem cell therapies for a multitude of conditions. They will be sponsoring another stem cell conference in April of this year. For many conditions, stem cell therapy has the potential to revolutionize treatment modalities and outcome. Additionally, we'll also see continued research and refinement in drug therapy and the ability to take a new drug and determine in advance whether a person will be able to benefit from it or would have an untoward reaction. The last challenge I want to mention to you is the very important freedom to serve challenge. From the time of the Ursuline sisters in Louisiana, who opened the first Catholic hospital, to our day, this has been a constant concern and source of vigilance by Catholic hospitals. Indeed, when the United States was a young nation under Thomas Jefferson and completed the Louisiana Purchase, the French Ursuline sisters, who had schools and a hospital in New Orleans, had grave concerns about whether they would be allowed to continue to serve the people of New Orleans according to their faith traditions. There is a very famous letter of Thomas Jefferson, handwritten to the Ursuline sisters, that assures them that this young nation has great regard for their service and would never interfere with the commitments of their faith. This letter was on display for about 2 years, a couple years ago, as that exhibit on the history of religious women went around the United States. Let me be clear that the ethical positions of the Catholic Church have contributed enormously to this nation, both for those who are cared for in our hospitals and those who are not. Our teachings on the importance of the care of the dying and what is morally appropriate has been for decades a treasure and a great comfort. Our stand against the destruction of the unborn at any time through abortion will always be a testimony to the Church's commitment to the protection of the most vulnerable. Our willingness to not be part of a culture of euthanasia that values people only for their serviceability and utility, and our constant teaching that these are important and critical moral positions that a nation must adhere to if it is going to be strong and endure, has helped this country so much. Basically, the Church's teaching on the dignity of persons and what that means in a social, economic, and healthcare context has been invaluable to our nation. However, there have at times been significant distortions of our Church's teaching, and in my judgment, at times these have been as destructive and problematic as rejections of the Church's teaching. For decades now, we have worked in a pluralistic society to maintain the protections provided by the Hyde, the Weldon, and the Church amendments, which protect us from having to do abortions, from having federal funding of abortions, from being shut out of federal programs because we will not participate in abortions and sterilizations, and allowing us to continue to make invaluable contributions to this nation without compromising our consciences. When it comes to abortion, this has been an extremely important protection. As I told you, there is no federal abortion coverage in the Affordable Care Act. And not only that, there are other protections for life in the ACA. Some of these include the requirement to make medical decisions for patients on a consistent basis, not on the basis of is one person developmentally disabled but another isn't, and therefore we make decisions on how much technology will give one versus the other. Not only does the bill provide for significant health coverage for pregnant women, but for vulnerable pregnant women, there is significant funding for counseling, job training, addiction treatment, housing, among other things. This is really important, particularly if we want to prevent abortions. In our nation, we have seen an 8% reduction in abortions overall. However, in women who are poor, we have seen an 18% increase in the number. It does not take too much thinking to see why so often women who are poor feel like they have no choice. Having healthcare readily available for them and their unborn child, as well as these other supports, will do a great deal to help vulnerable women and their unborn children. Let me say a few words about our current challenge, and that is the mandate to provide contraceptive and sterilization coverage for women. The mandate is part of it's part of the preventive services that must now be available in every insurance package that is sold. It is an excellent concept to have a package of preventive services that have to be available to everyone without a copay or a deductible. The Institute of Medicine in this country tells us there are 18,000 preventable deaths a year because people don't have access to preventive care coverage. HHS asked the Institute of Medicine to define for women what were the key components of a preventive service package. What should be included in the preventive services package that would be without a deductible or a copay? For almost all of them, we would be rejoicing. They include things like mammograms, colonoscopies, etc. You know, for many of us, $20 would never keep us from, $20 copay would never keep us from getting a mammogram or a colonoscopy. The PrEP might keep you from getting the colonoscopy, but the $20 won't keep you from it. But for women who are poor, a single mother with 2 kids, that is often meals for the last 2 days before payday, or refilling her child's prescription. So getting those things in the preventive services package was really wonderful. However, they also included contraception and sterilization. And I will not go into the long debate and controversy over this, and the road it has traveled and why we didn't get an initial exemption, but simply to tell you where we are right now. I'm happy to answer any questions you have about it, but it's the kind of journey that takes a long time to tell and is better with a bottle of wine. CHA said from the start that we had to not be required to provide this. And it's not so much because, frankly, many universities and hospitals in certain states in this country already have to provide it because of state law that they challenged in court and lost. But the principle on a federal level was far more important for other things like abortion and euthanasia. We could not let that stand. So where we are today is we are currently about to respond to a proposed rule that HHS has put out as their third iteration on this item. For this, religious employers will be defined using an IRS definition which distinguishes religious employers, distinguishes between religious ministries such as parishes and parish schools and hospitals and universities. Parishes and parish schools are tax exempt, and they do not have to file the IRS Form 990. For them, they will not have to buy contraceptive and sterilization coverage for their employees, and their employees won't be offered it. For hospitals and universities, other religious ministries that are tax exempt but have to file a 990 under the IRS regulations, we will be accommodated, and that's the difference. One group is exempt and one group is accommodated by virtue of the fact that we will not have to buy, negotiate for, refer for, or arrange for contraceptive and sterilization services. However, because the government wants these services available to women without a copay or deductible, the government will work with insurance companies and third-party administrators, among others, to provide these at no cost to the women and at no cost or involvement by us. We will have no part in this. And if the insurance companies would fail in their responsibility to do it, we will have no liability for the fact that they weren't provided. As you probably know, there are groups in the church that are not satisfied, and there are groups that are satisfied. CHA is in its early review of this, and we have said that there is substantial progress that has been made since the last pronouncement by HHS. And this major reason for that, we're not only very pleased that they've been very clear we don't have to buy, negotiate, refer for contraceptives, but one of the big issues for us and for the bishops was the very important and problematic part of the previous rule that was what they called, how they defined a religious ministry. In the definition of a religious ministry, they said that to be a religious ministry, you not only had to be not-for-profit, you had to have as your primary purpose evangelization, and you had to primarily employ your co-religionists and primarily serve your co-religionists. So that would have meant for our hospitals and universities, our major purpose had to be evangelization. We had to employ Catholics primarily and primarily serve only Catholics. It's never been the history. Our hospitals and universities would have never fit that definition, and we did not want to not be defined as a religious ministry. The CHA statement of our identity says we are a ministry of the church and following the principles of the gospel of Jesus Christ. We were not going to have that changed. I'm happy to tell you that it's all been removed, and the only part of that four-part test that remains is that we be not-for-profit. We will be formally responding to Health and Human Services before its April 8th deadline for comments, and we'll continue to work with the leadership of the Bishops' Conference, the administration, and our members to dialogue this issue to resolution. This brings me to a final challenge, and that is some of the divisions within our church. We have great hope as we see on the horizon our new Holy Father and his focus on the church as servant and humble. Hopefully we can find a way to rejoice in our shared creed and our shared belief in the sacraments, and have a more humble and discerning approach to other issues where we may not be in exactly the same place on how they should be handled, but give the Holy Spirit time to enlighten us all. As we look at these challenges, it is important to remember that as we face them, the option to give up is not possible. The care of the sick is a gospel mandate. A church that does not care for the sick, promote health, and show special concern for the vulnerable would have a hard time claiming to follow the gospel of Jesus Christ. We deal with these challenges aware that while they are daunting, they pale in comparison to the ones our founders faced. A new country, a civil war, world wars, the Depression, to name a few. The faith dimension of our ministry has always been our greatest strength, and that continues today. Thank you very much.
Okay. What do you think? What did you think about her talk? You know what my favorite animal is, Mr. Saravo?
What?
The cricket. Yes. Miss Reyes, what did you think?
I think it was interesting what she talked about like how much they spend on abortion.
Yes, there was a lot of...
Yeah,
Sorry, go ahead.
yeah.
Oh, about that. Passing it off. Yeah, there was a lot of talk about abortion. That was a deal breaker, at least for the ACA. For the I was just looking up the date. I got you. It was passed. The ACA. I looked it up on my phone. Was because I forgot the date. Was signed into law by President Obama in 2010. And Mr. Strawway.
I was pretty interested in how the way she kind of approached it and came at it from her perspective and used what she was she used persuasion to almost get to her point by the end, and she kind of dropped it like more and more throughout the entire speech, and she used the entire thing to get her point across, which I thought was a pretty good way to convince people that what you want is the right thing.
Yeah, is what she wants the right thing?
It's up to the person.
It's up to the person. Because that could be considered an ethical issue. Because she noticed there was one of the challenges was that you had this kind of this conflict with the ACA, the Universal Health Care Act, and they wanted certain care given to women, specifically women, abortion and contraception, that would be part of preventive care would be standard. But they objected. Now, should they have objected? Now they're following their ethics, but should their ethics be imposed on people? What do you think? I mean, if the local hospital is a Catholic hospital and it's the only hospital you can go to, or it's the nearest hospital you can go to, is it right that you have to play by their rules?
Yeah.
You think so? Why so?
Because where they are giving the care, I guess they can decide if they want to give the care or not.
Okay.
I feel like it's fair enough.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Okay. It's an interesting qualification. Not just fair, but it's fair enough. Okay. Because this was, I mean, they came to a sort of understanding with the government, and this talk was years ago, so you don't know some of the developments. The government was sued. I mean, as she said, there were some groups that had problems with this, even with the compromise, which was that you would have a third party, I guess, contract out for dealing with the contraceptive services, paying for them, covering them under the insurance. And the Catholic entity would not have anything to do with that, but you still have to sign off on it, I think. And there were some Catholic groups like Little Sisters of the Poor who sued the government over that. And I believe it went to the Supreme Court. I think they might have won. I'd have to look it up to see if they won that issue. But nevertheless, there were still some issues. There were some who did not see that as an ethical compromise because the Catholic entity would still have to sign off on something that ultimately they would object to, even though it was a third party doing it. What do you think? Good compromise? Bad compromise? Shouldn't have been a compromise? Let's see. Who looks like he or she has an answer at the ready? Ms. Dela Cruz, what do you think?
About the Catholic hospital.
About the compromise?
I think if they're going to a hospital security, they're going there to get better. Change the
Okay. So the patient should have that autonomy to make the decisions of this is what in combination with the doctor, this is what I need, and so this is what you should give me. This is the healthcare I need. Yes, or is that what you're saying? Or okay, interesting. Yeah. But I'm speaking specifically about the compromise that they effected with the government, and at this stage, it was still in embryonic form, no pun intended, because as she's talking about it, Sister Kian is talking about it, they were in the process of commenting on these new rules that the Health and Human Services was putting out. So it wasn't set in stone, but once it did become set in stone, then it was challenged in court. And I'd have to look up to see if the Little Sisters of the Poor won their case. I have the feeling that they did, that the government said you couldn't force someone who had a conscientious objection to being forced to pay for something that they didn't want to, or approve something they didn't want to. But don't quote me on that, because I might be wrong, Ms. Weir. I might be wrong. Yes?
I feel like the only ethical way to deny somebody the right to do anything with their body is if you have a perfect solution for them.
Mm.
So if you can solve the foster issue, if you can solve the trauma that comes to being alive,
Sure.
and going through that system and make it a perfect system or make it a perfect option, they're going to a loving family no matter what, or if a mother is I can't afford this, I need to make this option, you need to give that person financial aid or some sort of solution, and not just be no, we're making you make this choice and we're not letting you.
Yeah, and that was a point that's a good point. And that was a point that you should care for the whole person, not just, okay, you're going to have a baby because you got pregnant, okay? And yeah, that was a point that she made that was one of the good things about the ACA, was that it did provide, and they got in there that it would provide care for women who needed help, needed housing, needed support, needed advisement, maybe for a new job, for work support, daycare and healthcare, stuff like that. So that's a good point, because you're placing a burden on the person and you're not lifting the burden. So I just so you have this, I noted 5 issues that Sister Kian noted that were challenges, and I'll just go through them. The first one was economic challenges, that while the quality of care was getting better, the costs were also getting out of control. And I think there's a business ethical issue there. We talk about bioethics and medical ethics, but we don't talk about maybe the business side of healthcare ethics, which is why are the costs out of control? Because companies, I don't think it's an overstatement to say that pharmaceutical companies make billions of dollars in profits, which yes, they want to put back into their business and they say they'll develop new drugs. But at what point, and this in my mind, do you recoup the money that you put into developing the drug and even have made a little bit of extra coin on the side? You've made a little extra profit, but you still want more. You know what I'm saying? You still charge more. At what point, because you're dealing with sick people, at what point does the economics become an ethical issue or an unethical issue? That was the first one. The next one was healthcare reform, which I don't know where to say healthcare reform is in this country anymore. I mean, you had Obamacare, which is fine. It was a pejorative term in the beginning, but President Obama embraced it, so it's okay. And you still have Obamacare. You still have the exchanges online, but you also had a couple of years where the Republicans were in charge of both the House of Representatives, and I think they also had in charge of the Senate as well, and they were able to, well, gut some of the provisions of the Affordable Care Act, so it doesn't work maybe as well as it should. So that's an issue. The third issue was mission. Catholic mission is the hospital being faithful to its mission, and how is that mission passed on now that the sisters are getting older and dying and not in control of the hospitals anymore? Number 4 was technological advances, which this is interesting. Stem cells are undifferentiated cells. They're just they have potentiality to them. So you can take a stem cell and pretty much make it into anything. You can coax it into becoming heart cells, growing into differentiated cells like heart cells or kidney tissue, liver cells, and this might have some real benefit for growing organs and already, growing organs in labs to help with transplants. So technological issues. But then you have ethical issues like, the guy I saw in the news last night who is still alive a month later after his pig heart transplant. I guess he'll be eating a lot of bacon. He'll have a taste for bacon. And then the final one is freedom to serve. Can Catholic hospitals still serve the community according to their values? There might be some conflict there. In some countries like Ireland, there is conflict. They think that, a Catholic hospital that's not going to give abortions or contraception